Hi, I'm Jackie Knowles of Glasswork Pixie, partnering with Oceanside Glass and Tile to bring you this instructional Fusing Fundamentals video series. In this supplementary lesson, I'll provide tips and strategies for making your own fused glass patterns, because even though there are plenty of pre-made patterns out there, you might get inspired to make one that's completely unique to you.
A smart first consideration to take when designing a fused glass pattern is the size of the completed piece in relation to your tools and materials. Make sure the outer perimeter of the design is small enough to fit within your kiln and on your kiln shelf. Since kilns fire hotter in the areas nearest to their heating elements, so around the shelf perimeter in a kiln with side heating elements like mine, a glass piece that covers the entirety of the kiln shelf will have a higher difference in temperature between its center and its edges, making it extra vulnerable to thermal shock. You can account for this by using a firing schedule with very slow heating and cooling ramps, as we learned about in Supplementary Lesson B. Or you can design your pattern to be small enough that its edges are a few inches away from the kiln's heating elements. If your piece will be refired in a mold, you'll also need to measure the mold size and make your design perimeter small enough to fit within that as well. Another factor to take into consideration is the complexity of your pattern. Think through the design elements and make sure you have a plan for how you'll create each one. A simple circle, for instance, could be created out of a piece of sheet glass shaped with a grinder, a cross-section of a rod, a scrap of sheet glass that's been full fused until it's pulled into a circle, a dusting of frit sifted over a circular cutout, and many other creative ways. You'll have to balance the design's complexity with the amount of time you want to put into the piece's creation, since those metrics are usually directly correlated. Once you have a design of the right size and the right complexity, think through how it will need to be constructed within the kiln to ensure that you have the necessary materials to actually create a successful project from it. For instance, does the design call for a thickness of glass greater than 6 millimeters? If so, you'll need to have something to constrain it within the kiln, otherwise the fired piece will be larger than the original pattern, due to the 6 millimeter rule we learned about in Lesson 4. Or does the design call for elements that overhang a layer's edge? If so, you'll need to have something to support the overhanging portions, or they'll droop downward as it fires. Or does the design call for a complexly shaped line? If so, you'll need to have something to control its curve, like a flame to bend a stringer, or a thin-tipped applicator to draw out powdered frit. These are just a few examples of construction planning that will save time and potential headaches if considered during the pattern design stage instead of midway through a project. One of the most fun things to consider about a fusing pattern is its color palette. Whether you're going for a bright, bold look or a muted, neutral one, remember to take transparency into account. Transparent glasses transmit much more light than opalescent ones, so determine the type of look you want the final piece to have before you decide on the exact glasses. Remember to also consider that some glasses may change color or have reactions when fired, as we learned in Lesson 3. Glass prices can also vary depending on color, so be aware that a project's material cost will be higher if its pattern calls for lots of pinks and purples than if it calls for just blacks and whites. Drawing patterns by hand and taping them to your work surface is a perfectly acceptable approach. However, here are a few tips that might make the process more efficient. Using a digital design program like Adobe Illustrator, Procreate, or one of the many free graphic design softwares available online makes the design process quicker and more precise. It also enables designs to be modified, colorized, and resized with an ease that isn't possible by hand. Digital design pieces made to scale are also helpful in that they can be quickly printed and used as cutting or measuring guides. Whether you do so digitally or by hand, you can also make things more efficient by numbering the different pieces of your design. This will help you keep track of the various pattern pieces after you've cut them out, as well as which ones go where as you're building out the piece. I personally also like to add in the glass sheet colors for each shape, and any other notes on the structure or setup that I don't want to forget. Laminating your patterns is another useful trick. Sealing them in a waterproof layer prevents them from warping or tearing if you place wet pieces fresh from the grinder on top of them as you work. Note that when using transparent glass, you can lay the glass right on top of your pattern instead of cutting out the pattern piece as you'd need to do with opalescent glass. Having a laminated pattern makes this especially possible with wet pieces. Lamination also makes patterns sturdier and more durable, so you can reuse them for years if you want. Alternatively, if you don't have a laminator, you can also stick clear packing tape over your pattern to make it waterproof while you work. Or stick it to both sides of your pattern and trim off the ends to mimic full lamination. One last tip for those that like to reuse their patterns is to store the full patterns along with their cut-up counterparts in sleeves and then keep them in a binder or box of some kind. This way they can be labeled, sorted, and stored easily.
Now you should feel like you can turn some of your creative visions into fusing patterns you can work off of. Best of luck in bringing those ideas to life. If you enjoyed this supplementary lesson, be sure to check out the others in this series that cover common fusing issues and their solutions, and glass fusing safety.